Welcome to Qt Widgets and what? I already used that joke last time. Oh, sorry then. Well, welcome. In today's session, I'm going to show you 12 snippets of episodes from my video series called Qt Widgets and More. And well, let's dive into the name. Qt Widgets, well, that's the foundation, but there is also the and more part. And by now there's approximately 90 episodes out there where I talk about anything from tiny little gritty details with layout management on Windows to annoying things with QTableView. With model view, it's definitely one of those things that I talk a lot about. I'll also talk about stuff that doesn't have anything to do with Qt Widgets. There's actually a few episodes out there on how to speed up compilation by using precompiled headers. And that's the and more part. Throughout this session today, you can ask me questions, but please do forgive me if I can't remember the answers or even the episodes of all of those episodes I'm going to show you now. I'm going to show you 12 episodes if times permit. And I have been recording them for quite a while ago. In the chat right now, there is a link to the complete Qt Widgets and More episodes, or series as it stands now. If you're more into QML, now there is a link for QML. We have a whole training on QML up there. And even if you are into QML, then the Qt Widgets and More has a lot to offer. There's a link here for the parts of Qt Widgets and More where we're just talking about the and more part. So that's, for example, the how to speed up your compilation or how to create plugins for Qt Designer and so on. Anyway, all the episode starts like this. Welcome to Qt Widgets and More. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you how you can save a lot of time just by including mock files in all of your CPP files. Hang on for all the details. That got your attention, didn't it? Well, how can I possibly save all that much time? Well, I actually think that an order of magnitude was saving something like 15 to 20 seconds every time I touched a single little file in my projects. 15 seconds. So we try and have a 15 seconds break now. You can run and go to the toilet and get a new cup of coffee and whatnot in 15 seconds. It's a long time, especially when you just made a small minor change and you want to test whether that actually fixed your problem. But how? Well, it's not Qt that is broken. It's CMake, it's Qt. Well, it is whenever you use CMake together with Qt. What it will do, it will optimize for, in my view, the wrong thing. Namely, in your project, you will have a lot of mock files, at least if your project has a reasonable size. And these mock files need to be compiled. And in the old days, what we did was that we would compile each of them separately as a separate compilation unit and link them into the binary. That took a long time for each of those. And then CMake said, well, we can do that smarter. What we'll do is that we'll put all of these into one CPP file, include all of these mock files, and then compile that one. But the problem is that when you compile that one big include file now, here, or CPP file with all those includes, it is going to take 20 seconds. And that is for every single change you make to any file that has a mock file in there. Why? Well, go and watch the episode for details. Fortunately for you, I decided that I would create a small tool to add these include files to all of the CPP file, because that is exactly the trick. You'll just include the mock files into your CPP file. Then they will be compiled together with the CPP file. And likely that CPP file changes whenever you change the header file for that file anyway. So you will include them all in your CPP file, and I created a tool for that. Let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, including the mock files like this in all of your CPP files is going to be a lot of work. And it's going to be annoyingly that you'll forget to update them. So for that reason, I wrote a small Python script that is in KD Toolbox. There's a link below. And what that script does is two things. First of all, it updates the files accordingly, but there's also a Git hook with it. And the Git hook you just put that in your system, and then whenever you are about to make a commit, it will run the include mocks again to verify whether there's anything that needs to be updated. And if so, it will tell you, hey, you need to update that. Let's see it all in action. Sorry, I'm not going to show you that right now. You can see that in Qt Widgets. No, don't head over there now. Actually, every time I show something, you might already have noticed a number showed up right above my face, and that's a number in the playlist. So you can just write that number down, say, I need to go and watch episode number 53. And then you don't need to head over there right now, even though I tell you something groundbreaking. In Qt Widgets and More, I love to provocate my audience. And I do that by sometimes putting things a bit on the edge. I put out an episode with a title saying no more booleans ever. The idea is, of course, well, I even had to make a small adjustment at the end of that video to say, okay, there is situation. But in general, what you should be super careful about is in your APIs, or if you don't think of your code as APIs, just in your header files, do not add bool, comma something. And it comes from this setup. You have a function, very clear what it does, and it's perfectly fine. It takes a bunch of parameters. That makes a lot of sense. And then one day you come around and say, yeah, would be nice if it could also do this additional thing. So you add a boolean saying true or false. And if you look in the CPP file, say my function, all the regular parameters, comma, should you also do this or that? That's a boolean. When you look in the CPP or the header file for that matter, it's perfectly clear what's going on. But then time goes on and another adjustment comes around, comma, bool, whatever, and another comma, bool, whatever. And now you'll end up in the call site. You'll look at code that says, do my whatever thing, and then all the regular needed parameters, comma, true, comma, false, comma, false, comma, true, comma, true. You don't believe me? Oh, could you come over here for a second? I will bet you that in your code base, I can find lots of examples of this. We all have done it. I have done it. But that's where I want to change things. So in my code these days, whenever somebody write a comma, bool something, unless they are talking about a register in my hardware, I tell them, please use an enum instead, because that's so much more readable on the call site. And I have an example for you about exactly that right here. The code for that looked like this. It was just some test data that I created, but you could see here it says true, 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 false, false, false. And what that came from was my im data, where I had boolean for CD, for cassette tapes, for LPs, and so on. Now, I rewrote that, and just go over here. I rewrote that to use these enums instead, and my data now looks like this. All the way up here, you can see Speak and Spell was released on CD, cassette tapes, and on LP, and this is much, much more readable. Thank you, Jesper. Indeed, that was much nicer. In another episode, episode 64, I showed how I could move away from inheritance onto what I later learned was called typeration. Instead of going into taking snippet out of that episode, let me just show you a bit of code from there, and then hopefully you can watch it later to get the full details. So it started out with a need for setting up a diagram, actually setting the axis at specific positions on the diagram. And I had the code that you're looking at on the screen right now. You can see the setup method, taking the diagram, taking the position, and taking the configuration, being just, is it a normal axis or a Euro axis in that diagram? That worked well until one day I had an extra requirement. Now I also wanted to show dollar axis, and I wanted to show Norwegian cent or whatever that's called axis. And so I thought, hey, let me see, I need to parameterize this. It goes into a class hierarchy. So I set up a class hierarchy. It looks like this, the superclass. It's the axis configuration that now can have additional data in there. It has a setup method, and that is where it will call the appropriate method on the diagram. You can also see there is a constructor that takes information about what the position of the chart really, because the details is in the subclass, and you see that here, the currency axis. That one has in its constructor, it takes the symbol to use. And you can see the setup method now calling diagram add currency symbol. That worked fine. I went to code review with this. I was pretty happy with it. And somebody said to me, Jesper, what you really are doing there is you create this whole class hierarchy just to get some specific functions. And I went like, yep, that's what I'm doing. It's like, well, why do you need the class hierarchy in the first place? I was like, what? But eventually I came up with the code that you're looking at here. So I'm using this stud function with taking a diagram and returning nothing. That's a setup function that I've encapsulated in this type erasure here. And I now have a number of helper functions for that. You can see the currency axis, that one is taking the symbol, the helper function, taking the position, and it returns a function which does the actual setup. And it takes the diagram, that function, and it calls the add currency axis with the symbol and the position. And before you start your applauses, hold them please, because what I'm going to show you now is really awesome. Here we are. That is truly cool. That is what the call site looks like now. I'm creating my diagram, and then I have this create chart method that takes a vector of these functions. And basically what you see here is now normal axis at the bottom, a currency axis with euro symbol at the right, and a normal axis at the top. Trust me, that looks way better than what I had originally. So after 57 episodes of Qt Widgets and More, I felt there was time to play a bit with the format. And so I invited Giuseppe D'Angelo, a coworker of mine, also known as Pepe, onto the show. I like calling it the show. Anyway, what we were talking about there was qAsConst, or from C++, standards std : asconst. What exactly does it mean? And why does clazy all the time complain? Well, at the snippet you're going to see now, Pepe had just been talking about implicit sharing and how it could detach, meaning it would do a deep copy. Let's see what he says.
Okay, so what's happening there is that code written like that could detach. That's the kind of warning that clazy is giving you. And since it looks like that you're not modifying that container in any way, right? You're just iterating over the string list. You're just printing the strings. Clazy is getting a bit suspicious that, okay, so you're taking a copy of the container, but you don't want to modify the container. So why you're taking the copy in the first place?
Hold on a second here. You're saying that it could detach. I don't. Where on this particular line does it even have a chance to detach? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's not visible, but it's like behind the scenes. It has to do with the new for loop.
And then we continue discussing what is the solution and when is qAsConst the solution and what are the other solutions. There's quite a few of those. At this stage, you may go like, hey, Jesper, wait a second. Where are you? Well, you would likely have said that, right? You said that the show was called Qt Widgets and More. And so far, you've told us how to speed up our compilation by including mock files. You've shown that you didn't want booleans. You've shown type erasure stuff. You've shown how to use qAsConst. But where is the widget part in all of this? And of course, it is hidden behind the scenes. And trust me, there's lots and lots of stuff for widget developers in there. I talk, we'll see that a bit later in today's presentation here, a lot about ModView. But I also, from time to time, find something in my own code base and say, hey, this is actually generic and useful enough for everybody, anybody to use. And then I'll take it out there, I'll clean it off, dust it off a bit, remove whatever specific for my use case there is, and put it in Qt Widgets and More and share it with all of you. And that's exactly what the next part is about. But let's get over to the slightly younger me, the more grayish version, though there's a lot of gray here, namely Jesper from Qt Widgets and More, and hear what this next part is about. So in QTab, we employ people from all over the world, and some of them have names that have special characters in them. What you see here right now is Lukas Tinkle. I think it's pronounced correct. I hope, at least. And if you're on a smartphone, maybe I can just zoom it out here now. then you can see that there is a apostrophe, I don't know what's called, on top of the A. And if I'm typing that in a search field, obviously, if I just do string matching, then a regular A, let me just type here, Luke, and you can see both Lukas Tinkle and Lucas Graham, the Danish singer, who is not working for GitHub, unfortunately, they both match up to the K. But if I type A, then it will just be Lucas Graham, not Lucas Tinkle, that matches simply because that the A and the A with the on top of it do not string equal each other. At this stage, you may say, hey, yes, but that's cool. Give me the source code and I have that in my code base and I don't need to worry much more about it. It's not how Qt Widgets and More works. What I would like to do is not just tell you the end result, but also the road I took to get there. And in this episode, I needed to dive into lots of different places. I actually found a bug in Qt in itself that made it quite difficult to get this working. I had to learn about a lot of different things. I had to learn how is the item provided to the combo box in the first place. It's provided by a model. There you are, qAbstract item model subclass. And I also needed to figure out how do I remove those apostrophe and tilde and whatnot there is on top of characters that looks like regular characters to my non-trained eye. So just get the damn A out of there. Well, for that, QString has a method called normalized, if I remember correct. I had to listen to events. So we talked about event filters and events. There was a lot of stuff. 25 minutes long was this episode. Definitely worthwhile watching, besides getting the end result, namely the combo box, which is available on our GitHub. The next episode I'd like to introduce to you is exactly about model view, namely how do you get your models to not crash all the time? And for that, I have an episode coming right up. So what we're looking at here is our good old Depeche model, which now has the ability of actually playing the songs. Are you ready? So music for the masses. What? No, I meant Violator. What? Okay. Spirit. Speak and Spell. 1980s. Something is terribly wrong here. And now that other Jesper will go into the code and discuss what the model is. It's an instance of a class called Depeche model. Depeche mode. Model. Depeche mode. No? Seriously? Band from the 80s that still makes excellent music. Anyway, that model is filtered by filter collection. That's a qsort filter proxy model sitting on top of it. Hey, I just saved you like 3 minutes of him explaining, but back to him now. So I've set up my stack here of a view at the top, a proxy model in the middle, and a model at the bottom. And now I have my connection here. My connection says whenever the view is clicked, it will obviously emit a signal called clicked. Then that signal that goes out takes a model index, and I take that model index. I go and ask my model for what is the zeros row. So I could click any column, but I want the zeros column, namely the title column. Give me that data, or give me an index for that, and give me the data for that index, and convert that to a string. And that is what I expect to be on that position. Super obvious what the error is, right? Right? Okay, let me give you 5 seconds and you can type in the chat exactly what the error is. Starting now. 2, 3, 4. Got it? Well, let's hear what Jesper think the error is. Had you ever been to one of my Qt Widgets trainings and seen the model view section, you would by now think, oh my God, Jesper, you are never ever allowed to give an index to a model that is from somebody else's model. See, at the top here, my view got an index, namely the index from the model that was clicked, which was the proxy model. And I took that index and I gave it to the widget below. Let me put in a debug line in my data method so you can see that it is actually the wrong class that the index comes from. So over in my model, in the data method. Remember, if we look at main.cpp, it went to the model and asked for the data of this particular index. Let's check what that index is and watch me type really fast. There we are. So what I'm printing out here is who am I? So which model is this? And then which model did the index come from? And when I run the application now, you can see that it prints out Depeche Mode or Depeche Model a bunch of times here, which is when it's asking for the data to populate. But when I move up here to my user interface and I click somewhere, you can see, and I won't move my mouse now because as soon as I move my mouse, it will ask again, but just above the notes, the tunes or whatever you call those, you can see down there that it says Depeche Model and it says qsort filter proxy model. Don't you just hate people that can't write proper code that doesn't crash? Seriously? That's why I'm glad that I'm the HR director in QTab, because I created a new rule that says whenever some of our code crashes, we will put up a backtrace and see which line it crashed and whoever wrote that line. Would be fun, wouldn't it? Just to tell people that I did that and see how they reacted. Of course, they wouldn't believe me, but in any case, more seriously, it would be nice if the model itself could say, hey, you did something to me that isn't okay. You called me with a back or with something that broke the contract between you and me. And that's exactly what this episode is about. I will show you a bunch of macros. Yes, I hate macros too. That will help you with that. But let's have the other Jesper explain a bit more in detail. So what I could do to prevent disasters from happening, or at least warn about them when they're about to happen, is that in my data method, I could write stuff like if index.model is different from this, then complain, crash, whatever, do a qAssert is a good solution to that. Or if index.row is less than 0, it doesn't make any sense to ask for row -3. Or if index.row is greater than or equal to row count, you're asking for a row beyond what I have. Or, and that is exactly the kind of code that I and millions, I'm sure, of users out there have written throughout the years. But in Qt 5.11, Giuseppe D'Angelo, a good friend of and coworker of mine, he actually put in a new feature that's called check-index. And check-index does exactly that. So that's it, check-index. And you're very welcome. I'll take your thank yous until Giuseppe D'Angelo, also known as Pepe. What do you mean that you can never remember exactly which option to give in what method? And what do you mean that you are bored by that you need to write this Q_cert? It should have been part of the whole infrastructure. Well, Qt Widgets and More to the rescue. I've written a bunch of macros that will help you in those setup. Let me show them to you. So the macro that I wrote will take this Q_cert check index blah 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 line and replace it with something much simpler. First of all, the Q_cert is now built into the macro. Second, the macro is named in a way so I don't need to remember exactly which flag. So check_data. See, I'm in the data method here, check_data. Up here, I'm in the row count, check_row count, and so on. Thank you, Jesper. That was indeed a very useful trick. And let me admit, in my code base, I got it all over my models. It doesn't catch all that much anymore. But then again, I've been programming model view for a better part of 10, 15 years by now. So I have done my share of errors in there. But I would definitely encourage you to put it in there in your models. This was an example of a contract that was broken. The caller called onto the model with some data that wasn't okay. The model, if we use those macros, were actually capable of catching that error and complain about it. But sometimes the models themselves are wrong. They simply are implemented wrongly. And let me show you an example of that. At this stage, I would like you to pause the video and think, what kind of errors have you ever made in your models? Okay, I'll give you an example of an error that you likely have made in your models. You have forgot to test for the row. If you forget to test for the row, what will happen in the data method? Well, the view will ask, So what is the text on item, this particular item? And you will say, the text is USA. Then it'll say, okay, cool. Can you tell me what is the color? It will ask for the foreground color. You'll say USA. And I'll say, that's a really weird color. Okay, never mind. What is the size hint? And things will go really south from there. So the problem with these kind of problems is that sometimes it's not that obvious which action you need to do from the UI to trigger the particular behavior. So for example, imagine that you implemented an index and a parent method in your model. The index method would be called from the view whenever it wanted to get a child. And then from there, you wanted to go back to the parent for some reason, and the parent method would be called. The index that was returned from calling index and then down to the parent and down to the child and from child up to the parent again should be exactly the same index as the one for the index to start with. But how do you test that? Well, for that, we fortunately in Qt 5 got a new tool. Let me see, it's called qAbstract Model Tester, I believe. What it does is that you will start it, give it a model, and it will call all different corner cases onto that model. Super cool in your unit tests. You can instantiate a class of qAbstract item model tester. Yes, I needed to read that up. And what it does take is a model and it takes a failure mode. And now when I run it, what I'll see is that it says fail variant can convert qsize. And that's exactly the size hint that was asked into the model. And the model said, okay, USA, or whatever it said. And then the model tester tried to convert that string into a qsize for the size hint role, but it couldn't. So not only do the qAbstract model tester test your model when it's created, or when you instantiate that terrible named class, it will actually continue listening to the class. It will hook up to all the signals from your model. And whenever you do, say, like insert a row, then you hopefully will emit a signal called row inserted. And the tester will listen to that and say, ooh, let me check whether all of these preconditions and postconditions still hold. And so it'll do a lot of tests on your model. Pretty awesome stuff. That made me think, can't I automate that? Can I not create something that will listen to Qt's internal, and whenever a model comes into existence, I will hook it up to that model tester right away. If I do that, then I will be like kind of unit testing all my models on the fly. Of course, it's not like real unit testing, but it's more like live testing my models. Whatever I do with my model in the user interface, I do something, a row is inserted, the model emits a signal, and it's going to be tested right away. And it will complain right away if I have a bug there. So yes, I created such a class. You can look at the episode for more details on that. It was far, far from easy because I needed to hook really deep into Qt to be notified about new objects being created and testing whether they were actually qAbstract item model subclasses and so on. But it was definitely worthwhile in the end. I caught quite a few bugs in my code with this. I also found a few bugs in Qt, and I actually even got super annoyed by my application being slowed down drastically from this. So don't do this in your release version, but it's definitely worthwhile having it on for a couple of weeks or months to get to all the corner cases of your models. I do talk a lot about model view in Qt Widgets and More, and that's the reason for that. It's by far the most complex things in Qt. And one of the pieces in that puzzle that makes it somewhat super complex is proxy models. Proxy models are this beautiful thing that makes it possible for you to do a good separation of UI and model. So at the top, you have your UI somewhere far, far up. And at the bottom, you have what is providing the data. But you want to modify your data slightly. And in an episode, I implement a reverse row proxy model. And basically what it does is that it takes row number 0 and make it into row number 4. It takes row number 1 and make that into row number 3, and so on. And you could argue, why didn't I do that in the model at the base level? Well, because the model at the base level was thinking about doing things and it had some certain order, and possibly that order was shown in another view. And then I put this proxy model on top of it, and the proxy model did the reversing of rows. Very nice. At the stage where we'll get into the video now, I have just explained how you implement a proxy model. You need to implement a number of QAbstract item model subclasses methods, but you also need to implement some of the methods from qAbstract proxy model. There are some mapping of indexes going on. But when we get into this episode here, I just told the audience, hopefully you in a near future, that sorry, I'm missing one crucial thing, namely listening to all the signals from underneath. Let's hear what Jesper has to say about that.
This is a time where you despair and you say, that seems to be really difficult. I follow you so far with these 6 method or 7 method that you needed to implement, but you're talking about a lot of signals from underneath. There is data change, there is about to insert rows and about to remove rows, and rows inserted and rows removed, and lots of methods that you want me to implement. I better just forget about proxy models and just get going without them. And you couldn't be more wrong. You are entirely right that there is a lot of work to implement this 100% correct, including unit testing and whatnot. But the lines of code that you saw there, I have that in production. And I know, and there's a comment in my code, I hope, that says this model do not act upon any changes to the signals. I have a model that was a good separation from view and business logic, that extracted and calculated and whatnot a bunch of different data that was shown in a table. And I didn't change the data of that model as soon as it had been created. So the model would never ever change, which is, I don't know if it's true for you, but for many of my models, they don't change. And if they do change, I will just tear down the view, change the model if it's a larger change, put up the view again, and everything is fine. And I do not need to worry about this. So in that situation, it's perfectly okay to just stop here as long as you comment on that, hey, it doesn't do any changes underneath. But if you want to have something that works more generically, then you need that underneath. And for that, you also better need a bunch of unit tests. Let me show you the code for all of this.
Sorry, I'm not going to show you this code here. You can head over to Qt Widgets and More and look for that episode. Actually, it's 2 episodes, and in total, it's 48 minutes long. Sorry for not being brief. The production team in KTab tells me all the time, people is never ever going to watch anything that long, but I trust that you guys actually are different, because if you want all the gory details, you need to listen and learn for all of it. And well, in that episode, we will go into all the details of all the signals being emitted and how do you react to those signals. Talking about model view, there is also the view part of it. And one of the views that we have all been using for decades now is QTableView. QTableView looks like a spreadsheet, and I'm sure that was the intention of those who designed it back then. But ever since, it has been used for lots of other things. It's like showing tabular data that wasn't exactly meant to be editing or to be edited. One of the things that annoyed me for a long time was how much, vertical space the table view took for each cell. So it would have lots of space around at the top and at the bottom. And it took me many attempts at fixing that, including using tree views instead of table views, because they are much more compressed. But then one day, yoo-hoo, I found a switch to fix it. And let's head over to Qt Widgets and More and see the younger finding that switch. Get ready for seeing the hallelujah moment of this video here when I do the same thing for rows. So all I need to do is, instead of saying it for set section resize mode 1, 2, and 3, and whatever, I can simply say set section resize mode. Everything should be resizing to the size here. let me now do the same thing for the rows. Something that I don't understand why it's not the default. Maybe it's to be compatible. Observe that my rows now are much slimmer. They are resized to the content rather than having that enormous additional space. You gotta love that young man's enthusiasm, huh? Well, let me admit, in my code base, I don't use QTableView anymore. I use QTableView. And in this constructor, it sets up this row compression among a lot of other things. I won't talk much more about ModView anymore now, but I'm just for the completion of that whole section, we have the models, we have the proxy models possibly, we have the view, and one thing we're missing is the delegates. There's 3 episodes, if I remember correct, 78 to 80, on delegates in the ModView framework. And I actually developed a framework around those that in my own code base I use a lot for drawing the things with a delegate, because I found that the actual delegates, the Q item delegate or the Q styled item delegates that comes with Qt, they are somewhat difficult to work with in some corner cases. So anyway, episode 78 to 80. Before we finish up, I'd like to invite back in Giuseppe D'Angelo. We had a long discussions about strings in Qt because I found it harder and harder to decide which string class I should be using. Should I be using QString or QStringView or QLatin1string? There was so many to choose from. So I asked him a very simple question: which one should I be using? Let's hear his answer. We have QString, we have QString literal, we have QAnyStringView, we have, I don't know. Can you tell me what should I be using all of these for, and when should I be using them? And can you keep that really short?
Okay, I'll try to keep it really short. If you want just one answer, the class that you want to use and you are going to use, let's say 95% of the time, it's simply going to be QString. That is the class to store, manage, manipulate strings inside Qt. Of course, the name says it all. It's called QString. And that's the one you're going to use most of the time. All right.
Okay, that's it. I just wanted that on video. Thank you very much. And in the next week's episode, I guess not.
Bye. Oh, wait,
and
there is
the
more.
Slightly more elaborate answer is...
Okay, let me go a little bit more in detail.
It was actually a quite nice and interesting chat I had with Pepper there. And if you look at the table, we did touch on quite a few different things. QStringView, QLatin1string, QUTF-string, blah, 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 blah. And what I took away from this was that, yeah, I was doing quite okay in using QString in most of the cases because it is rather smart these days. But also, I should look into using QStringView quite a few different places in my code base. But I'll let you watch that episode for all the gory details. As an extension to that episode, we also touched on a class or whatever it really is, a mechanism inside of Qt called QStringBuilder. And if you never heard of that, well, with a bit of CMake magic, you might actually speed up your code base quite a bit, assuming that you do a lot of string concatenation. But let's have Pepe explain what it is in a bit more details.
So suppose that you want to concatenate, let's say, 2 or more strings. Okay, Clearly, QString defines an operator plus that allows you to do that. So if you write A plus B plus C, well, those are strings, you get a string, which is the result of the concatenation.
Yeah.
In Qt, you can also do the same thing by writing A percentage B percentage C. So you're going to use a slightly different operator, a percentage, rather than plus, again, for performing the concatenation.
Okay, Pepper, stop, please. We're running out of time in this small presentation here. What he basically told us was that if I use percentage instead of plus, then I'll get a much more optimized version of string concatenation. And I told him, seriously, I'm not going to put percentage instead of plus all over through my code base and say, well, you can add a define to your build system. And with that define in, Qt will do the percent work even when you write plus. So my question obviously was, Why is that not the default then?
The reason why it's not turned on by default is because it's got at least a couple of subtle incompatibilities. Or not so subtle incompatibilities. Well, one is kind of visible. There could be some cases in which if you enable this, your code stops compiling. But there is a second one, and the second one is actually a bit more subtle and a little bit more dangerous, which is this. If you build a string by concatenating things together, and you use string builder in order to do so, and you take that result of the concatenation and you store it in a variable that of which you don't declare the type explicitly, okay? For which you're using auto type deduction. So you write something auto result equal a plus b plus c, just to say on the sample before. What's the type of result? You would expect, okay, that's clearly concatenating strings. It must be a string, but what we have just said is that that's not the type of that expression anymore once you enable the string builder. The type of that expression is now string builder, okay? And this is kind of a danger because what string builder really does, as I mentioned, is it takes its little notebook and just writes down, okay, I need to concatenate that, that, and that. It doesn't do the actual concatenation until you tell it to do so. And by having the ability of storing a string builder into, say, an auto variable, opens the door for a possible mistake there. That is, for instance, you build that variable like that, and then you manipulate or destroy one of the original strings, and then you finalize the conversion. Now, that little notebook that the string builder had in hand is referencing a destroyed string. And so soon enough, when you run this code, your code will crash.
What a great note to end this presentation on. Your application might crash in random, unexpected ways. Well, don't despair. The episode will tell you that clazy has a check for exactly this, and if you turn that clazy check on, and there's an episode telling you exactly how to do that, surprise, then you will not get in trouble. Rather the contrary, your application will run somewhat faster, at least if you do a lot of string concatenation with multiple strings. Before we end, I'd like to peek slightly into the future because my future is different from your future. My future has already happened while yours still has. What? Yeah, well, I've recorded 5 videos that hasn't been put out yet, and I'd just like to give you a small idea of what's going on there. So I started out with a video on algorithms, telling you, hey, you should be using algorithms. And I showed you a bunch of places where I rewrote some old code of mine to some new code, and it made it much more readable. And that actually led me into a summer holiday project of mine, namely learning template metaprogramming so I could write a lot of cool algorithm wrappers. And actually, I put out 4. This time travel is a difficult thing. I will put out 4 episodes on template metaprogramming. And if you look at your screen right now, this code might look like magic to you. It did, for me at least, when I started my summer holiday. And now I even wrote that code. So in 4 episodes, I'll go and discuss template metaprogramming with you. And hopefully you'll be able to read and possibly even produce code similar to this. That's it for this episode of Qt Widgets. And well, I would tell you now to have a great time, but I'll actually end up saying have a great conference, and I hope to see you in my episodes on Qt Widgets and More.